to hand it over to today's speaker, John DiMaggio.
Excellent, thank you, and welcome everybody. Thanks for attending. We're going to talk about ransomware in healthcare, risk prevention and response. So before we get started, there's a disclaimer. I'll give everybody time to read that, part of the deal. And with that, I will tell you a little bit about myself. So I spent most of my career as a chief information officer in large healthcare organizations, institutional pharmacy business. Since then, co-founded Blue Orange Compliance. We help health plans, hospitals, long-term care business associates around the country protect their information and comply with regulations. And that's what I look like. So, I'm also a member of in long-term care leading age CAST. I was one of the co-authors of the CAST cybersecurity work white paper. It's a good read, and if you go to the CAST website, you can download that. It's got some information about cybersecurity and healthcare. So today we're going to talk about ransomware, and to do that, we're going to talk a little about healthcare information landscape, give an overview about cybersecurity, because ransomware is a strain of cyber threat. It happens by someone getting access to your network, and a lot of bad things can happen when that happens. So talk about cybersecurity in general, give an overview. Then we'll get into some ransomware details. Ransomware in healthcare, most healthcare organizations are covered by HIPAA, so there's some nuances there about ransomware and HIPAA and some things you need to look out for. And then how to protect, prepare, and respond. There's kind of three components to this. You can't just be defensive. Unfortunately, these events, whether there's a good chance that they will happen, so yeah, be ready. Try to protect as best you can, and then be ready for when they happen, and then respond. And then I'll go into a case study for Erie County Medical Center, who was hit with a ransomware attack, and that'll kind of tie some of our concepts together. So talking about healthcare here, I mean, healthcare has changed. I'll have a couple slides on this, but you know, back in the day it was all paper. Now at accelerating rate, everything's connected, mobile access, IoT devices, cloud, constantly buying new organizations, whether it's hospitals, physician practices, or whatever, and everything is, there's no real border anymore, so there's connectivity everywhere. Kind of in more detail here, there's folks from a lot of different types of healthcare settings on the call, but healthcare really got kicked, dragging, and screaming into electronics starting in 2010 with High-Tech Act, especially acute care. And healthcare in general is kind of behind some other regulated industries, banking, finance, insurance. But now with this kind of push to electronics, you know, security is one of the things that I don't say just gets left behind. But in general, healthcare doesn't have the maturity that some of these other business lines have with security. And acute care was added since high-tech happened. Long-term care is a little behind acute care. So all these different technology enablers, and the value of healthcare information is about 10 times what a financial record is. So the kind of weakness of security, high value of information makes healthcare a big target for these types of events. So you know, hacking is one of the leading causes. Here's some of the largest healthcare breaches of 2017, and these things just don't happen to large companies. They happen to small companies. We'll talk about that. So here's some theory. So if something's connected to the internet, someone will try to hack it. So if it's out there and you can access it and someone can see it, there's a good chance someone will try to get into it. If it has any value at all, some things out there don't have any value, someone will probably invest time to steal it and try to sell it. And for whatever they sell it for, it's probably worth less than the victim. And if you don't invest in it, it will be stolen. So again, this is kind of the theory, and we see this ring true all the time, especially in healthcare. We see articles all the time about hacking and breaching and ransomware. So talk about some of the risks in healthcare for these events. Obviously, talking about ransomware today, there's a big component of downtime and business disruption while your files and information is locked up. It's really tough to operate your business. We're going to talk about HIPAA here, but if some of these cyber events lead to breach, there's Office of Civil Rights enforce it, civil litigation. Biggest thing is your reputation, credit monitoring costs. So a lot of bad things that can happen when a cyber event hits your organization in healthcare. So here we're going to talk about in general kind of what motivates cyber criminals, and a lot of this has to do with ransomware. So the motivators, big one in ransomware is money, right? So they want money either by ransom or they're going to take your data and sell it. Another motivator is fun. Now, unfortunately, with fun, I'll put that they just want to mess up your stuff and cause chaos. They can do that for fun. Social political cause, obviously we've seen in the news, elections, et cetera, or they just want information from your organization as far as client lists, financial information, et cetera. So, like most processes, there's best practices. So one of the things is to case out your organization. And a lot of this, especially when we're going to talk about the Erie County, there was a lot of reconnaissance involved there. They want to scan to see if you have any weaknesses. They want to get in. They want to stay in, and then clear their tracks when they leave. So from layperson's terms, some analogies here. Someone wants to rob your house, they'll drive by, see when you leave. If they want to check out your organization, they'll look on LinkedIn. Ton of information about your organization out there. You've got IT people that want to talk about their technologies and what they know and what you use in your organization. They're going to try to rob your house. They might go and check the doors and windows, try garage codes. Here they're using technical means or social means to try to see where your weaknesses are. Either scan your ports and see, we'll talk about leaving your ports open on the internet. They might call and ask for passwords or go in your organization and try to walk around. Usually if you have a clipboard and a tie, you can get almost anywhere in organizations, depending. Then once they know your weaknesses, and if you're in your house, when you leave, they know that your windows aren't locked, so they're going to come in through that window. They may know from a hacker standpoint that you have these weaknesses, vulnerabilities. They'll take advantage of those. And then once they're in, they want to stay in. So if you're in your house, they want to have a spare key, come back and forth without you knowing. Here, create a back door, and then dust your prints or clear audit logs, because systems have the capability, and that's one thing we'll talk about, is to log everything that happens, right? So some of those are critical to try to keep, so you can find out what happened after an incident happened or during it. So here's some misconceptions. This will never happen to me. Our IT people have our network secure. We're not big. We're not a target. We hear this a lot of times, or I don't have to worry about this because I have cyber insurance. So those are all some common misconceptions. This can happen to any organization. We've seen Equifax and the largest healthcare organizations of security teams, all the way down to the smallest organization. And so healthcare is largest number of records breached. And why? Because the value is high. So again, a good market. So ransomware is malware, kind of bad software. We'll talk about entry points, but usually it enters your network through files, ads, clicking on things, network weaknesses. We'll talk about all of those. It's going to encrypt your files or make them at least unreadable to you, the user. And this type of cyber event, they ask for ransom in order to get the key back to unlock your files. And this is a key point. Usually, no data is stolen. This will come into play when we talk about HIPAA and breaches. Usually, these ransomware attacks, all they want to do is get money. So they come in, get their money, and get out. But while they have access to your system, they can do basically anything they want to do. So usually no data is stolen at this point. We'll talk about kind of trends in ransomware, going some scary things about what ransomware might be in the future. So big increase in ransomware, and why is that? Because it works. So if something is working and people are making money on it, it's a growth business, and it will only stop growing, be popular, and it doesn't work anymore. So you can kind of think about this, or your own organization is, if you had ransomware attack, how long would you be down for? So if you think about if all your files were locked up and your ability to recover from this, how long would you be down? Good question to ask yourself, because for some businesses, being down for multiple days might be okay. You might just put a close sign on your front door and say, we'll be back. In many organizations, especially healthcare organizations, that would be kind of a critical issue. And then it's cost industry $1 billion in 2016. So very profitable, and that's why it's on the rise. So hackers marketplace. So just like any other kind of marketplace, hackers are people that want to use this stuff, build businesses around it. So you can actually go on and kind of rent ransomware as a service. So you don't even have to write your own ransomware. You can go on and rent somebody else's. And they're pretty reputable. There's a warranty. If it doesn't work, you can kind of call back. So there's a pretty low barrier for entry into this business. Also on the dark web, there's servers for rent. So servers that have been compromised, that their owners don't know they're being compromised. So if you want to rent a compromised server for whatever you want, those are for rent. And then some of the tools, a lot of the tools, or all these tools that are used by these criminals are readily available. Some of the good guys use them to try to do penetration testing and things to try to see how far they can get in your network. So you don't have to have a lot of money or knowledge to actually get into this. Cyber attacks, root cause of breaches. It used to be for breaches back in 2011, lost laptops, those types of things. Now it's mostly these cyber attacks. Next leading cause is by your business associates or people that you trust with their information. And then here's the kind of scary thing: average days before a breach is detected is 201 days. So again, someone gets into your network. It's usually a long time until you discover it. One of the things they may do is they do a ransomware attack. They may do all types of things before they want to do that. So that's a scary stat as well, that to take that long to determine, because you have to be pretty sophisticated to see if someone's actually inside your network. So like most people, I'm trying to think with a lot of technical folks, how does this stuff work? Okay, so there's several components to ransomware. There's actually the software that actually goes through and encrypts your the files. It will utilize an encryption algorithm. So there's many out there, RSA, AES, and usually use one of the standard ones, or even one of the ones that are available inside Windows. There is a key. So whatever algorithm they use, they'll use a key to, and unfortunately, these algorithms are written and strengthened all the time, so they're very tough to crack. It's good for if you're encrypting your own data, but when your data gets encrypted by somebody else, then that turns into a negative. There's almost usually a ransom message that comes up that says, hey, your information is scrambled or encrypted. Pay this amount, and here's how to pay it. Sometimes there's a time clock to it that says if you don't respond in X amount of time, the price goes up. So there's different flavors of that. Usually there's a command and control server, so a server that's sitting someplace that kind of controls this stuff, and it's a server that will have a place to pay and a place to get your key back. But sometimes these things, these servers exist. Sometimes they're taken down. Sometimes they don't exist at all. But a reputable ransomware business person will have one there. So they can have a way to take your money and then reputably give you your key back. So as far as a way to pay, there's usually some type of wallet ID for some of the cyber currency, and of how to pay. So they want to be able to let you pay, and they want to be able to, if they're reputable, give your key back. And then one of the critical things is price. In business, I mean, one of the most critical decisions you can make is how to price your product, and it usually will be based on cost or based on value. These are more value-based. So, and depending on who they're attacking, if they're attacking somebody's personal computer, probably the price for that or what they're willing to pay would be low. If they're in a large, attack a large healthcare organization, it will be high, but hopefully, if they price it right, not too high, that you won't want to get, so you can get your information back. So ransomware with clients insert it into your network, starts encrypting files, and then tries to encrypt anything else that's attached to, or any user that can user files that can get its that can access, encrypt it, keep going across your network, possibly replicating itself, and including we'll talk about backup. So mostly on home computers, if you have a backup that's kind of always running and stuff like that, if it can get to your backup files, it will encrypt those as well. So we'll talk about how it spreads. Then you have the lovely message and tells you how to pay. And then if you pay, sometimes you'll get your stuff back. And this decision of whether you pay or not pay is a tough one. We'll talk about kind of things you should consider there. So that's kind of the guts of it, the different kind of key components about ransomware and how it works. So depending on those components I just talked about, depending on how they're organized, how it's encrypted, what it does, how it asks for money, they're identified as a strain. So these are kind of thumbprints of the type of ransomware that you're dealing with right now. Apocalypse, Server, CryptoWall, SamSam, so they all have their own fun names. And depending on what the message is, there's some kind of utilities out there where you can kind of feed in the message. It will try to tell you what type of strain you have, and then you can kind of find out some more information. Because one of the critical things you want to know is, did it steal, does this particular strain steal any of my information? Another key thing you want to know is, has this command and control server been taken down? Is there a key out there that's been compromised that I can use to unlock my stuff? So that's why these ransomware strains, usually it's one of these. Unfortunately, in the world out there, these things are going to evolve. There's some talk about these will evolve to be more kind of destructive and cause chaos, or mine cryptocurrency, or actually take your data. And again, that's why we cover some of the cybersecurity overview, because if someone has access to your network, they can do all of these things. So these are the ransomware, some of the ransomware strains, and there's new ones and new capabilities being created all the time. Why? Because they work. So here's some of the types. So malicious ransomware is the criminal has no intention of unlocking your stuff, so they just want to mess your stuff up and have you pay for it, or just encrypt your stuff and have you have a bad day. Most of these are business-based. Again, the financial-based one, there's amateur ones. Maybe someone got hold of some code and they just want to try it and hopefully have you pay for it. Again, have you and not be a return customer. So you don't. So they have no intention. There's no command and control server. But hopefully you pay it, you don't get your stuff back. Some of these, they're businesses, and they want to, if you pay, you get your key back. So more and more people will pay to see if they get their key back. But these things will work. They have command and control servers. Bitcoin wallets and things, they might move these around so they don't get tracked out there. But those are ones who, I mean, that's why I have question marks. If you can call these people reputable, this is the reputable of the criminals. And then a couple different techniques. So there's a spray technique where they have access to hundreds or thousands of emails. Then they'll put a little file in there and shoot it out. And if they send out 10,000 of them, they may get 500 people that actually click and pay their money. Again, that's good business. Or targeted. So targeted is they're looking around for organizations that are willing to pay more money. So maybe it's and the organizations that will pay more, either their value of their information is so high, or they can't do without it for long periods of time. So that's where healthcare really never stops, especially if you're a hospital. So if you can't do without your data, also then that's a target. I'll talk about ways that they target, and if they find one of those places, then they'll obviously make the price, adjust the price accordingly. So entry points here. So some of these ones, especially, we're going to talk about our case study, is exposed parts of your Windows servers, your servers. So usually there's no good reason to expose your server to the internet. So there's a thing called server message block, which is a way for Windows servers to expose file shares to the internet. So the cool thing about that is I'm at my house, I can actually go to the internet, connect, and see my files. That's a great convenience, but unfortunately there was some weaknesses in that, and then Microsoft saw the weaknesses, patched it. I think, and this one particular one was Eternal Blue. This was patched in March, I think it was last year, with WannaCry. However, a lot of organizations didn't patch it out there, so that's where the WannaCry ransomware took advantage of that. Found organizations that had this exposed, and then use an attack on that. Remote desktop protocol is another one. That is a protocol in Windows where you're at home, you want to connect to your desktop at work. So one way to do that is to get in the IP address for remote desktop protocol, log in, and then you have access to your device. Or maybe it's a system admin. Hopefully, system admin wouldn't do this, but to go on to their administrative machine in the office. So that's another exposed protocol that we'll talk about in the Erie County one. But they scanned for a certain port that was open, and then through a weak password, they were able to get control of the network. So both of these things can be accessed, but there's better ways to access it than exposing your network, usually through a VPN connection. So that's one way to get in is, I guess, poor network hygiene or network configuration. Unpatched software. So these commercial software vendors are there's always vulnerabilities found, and they always will patch their software regularly. Usually they're behind the vulnerability, but a lot of times it's before kind of a known exploit comes out. So when these patches come out, either on your Windows devices or your servers, I know sometimes it's tough to patch things because the servers are connected to other systems that may impact it, but you want to be able to patch the software too. That's another way to get in if there's a known vulnerability, especially ones that have been patched that are still out there. Malicious websites. So sometimes you go to a website and that could be a hacked website that's going to install ransomware on your machine. One of the biggest ones are phishing, whether it's a targeted attack or spray attack. So you've all seen, hey, here's a free Amazon gift card. Click on this, or open this invoice that maybe looks like an invoice, but it's not. So that's another way in. USB drives, generally weak passwords. So there's a lot of ways into your network, and if there's a way into your network, either someone's could steal your data, mess it up, or charge ransom for it. So I have ... because there's some other kind of interesting ways in. This is a casino that got hacked because their thermometer in their fish tank. So this was connected to the internet. the fish tank was connected to their network, so that's why somebody got in. This is a kind of a unique way, but now with Internet of Things devices out there, usually they want to get them to market and sort of security is the afterthought. So there's one way. This is a good one to US CERT. These alerts come out all the time. This is just over a month ago that Russia state-sponsored cyber actors are trying to go after these network devices for small businesses. So there's a ton of ways in. The bad guys are always looking for new ways in. Good guys are trying to patch it, so you got to kind of stay ahead of that curve. Unfortunately, though, there's a high probability that you'll be in between it and have one of these attacks. So how does it spread? So it got into your network, and it's going to try to access basically anything it can find. So it'll start with the files on your system. If you're part of a share, it'll go to that share, infect those, and infect anyone else who also has those shares. So one of the things is if you have file shares out there, we'll talk about preventative stuff, but who has access to those? The people who really have access need to those needed. They're basically a network share for everybody, for everything. Those are places to have it spread easily. Another item which can cause a spread is local or domain address admin rights. So if your local computer, if you are the admin of that, so if you buy a computer from the store, you are usually the administrator of that, and it can you can do a lot of things on it, which is good because it's your home computer. We do see a lot of companies that install computers for their users where they have local admin rights because they're easier that way. Or if you're a system administrator, you have domain admin rights to do certain things. You want to make sure those are limited. If for some reason this ransomware gets into an account that has these rights, or goes to a computer that has these rights, it can spread a lot faster. So that's another kind of key thing about how it spreads. But once it spreads, it will spread however it can, however fast it can. So great, that was all bad news. So what to do? So there's three things in balance. So you want to be able to protect your environment. So I didn't say prevent, because you can't particularly prevent it, but you can do some things to reduce the odds of either a cyber event or, of course, or ransomware happening to your organization. One of the biggest items, and we'll go through this in the case study, is to prepare. So you've done what you can to protect. You should expect something like this to happen, and when it happens, what are you going to do? Because the last time you want to try to figure that out is when all your users are knocking on your door and calling the help desk and saying they can't access their files, and no businesses can figure it out, can run, departments are calling you, they're shut down, and you're going to try to figure out, what do I do now? So preparing is also a key thing. Then there's kind of an after party about how do I respond to folks, and then do some of the things we need to do from after the event happened as kind of cleanup things. So we'll talk about those three. So protect. So we talked about the setting up your networks are configured correctly. These would be making sure that some of these services are not exposed to the internet. These services are good. A better way again is using VPN to get into your network and then launching these services rather than having to be exposed. Even though the SMB was that patch was fixed, there's nothing saying that there won't be a future vulnerability of that. So again, not exposing those. And segmenting your networks off. So if people don't need access to certain things or certain file shares, don't give them access, which is kind of runs into the next topic, which is least privilege. This is one of the major kind of security safeguards you need, whether you're doing HIPAA or just good security practice, to make sure that users have the least amount of privilege, whether that's privilege to do administrative things to their devices, or access to information that they need to do their jobs. So that's a key thing. The more you give them, the more risk, not only from an outsider standpoint, take control of that, risk from an insider standpoint that they have information that they don't need. So whether it's administrative rights or giving access to data, even in your EHR system, if they are a nurse and don't need access to the financial module, then don't give it to them. So there's a whole kind of role-based security that's good security practice. And limit file shares. So file shares, sometimes those are out there and they've been there for a while and you're not quite sure which group or who has access to those. Those are a lot of things that we find in organizations when we do penetration tests. There will be these file shares out there that users that you don't think have access to it have access to it. So that's bad for a number of reasons, but from a ransomware standpoint, it can help your ransomware spread quicker. Patching, we talked about patching. Make sure your systems are patched. Sometimes, so hopefully if you're in a business environment, you're forcing these patches to go down. Your network administrators are patching their servers and firewall firmware, et cetera. But sometimes you think that's going on and it's not going on for whatever reason. And we've seen that a lot as well. So one way to check that out is regular vulnerability scans. Those will go out and look for configuration issues or to see if there's any known vulnerabilities in these devices too that can be taken advantage of either by ransomware or these other techniques. Backups are huge. Backups are many times the only thing between you and getting your information back. So these ransomware will go through and make anything it's attached to. Most organizations, these backups aren't accessible to kind of most users. But if for some reason, your system domain administrator password gets hacked, and we've seen that happen a lot, and it works their way into backups, then your backups have problems too, and you may never get your data back. Also, one of the trends is kind of slow ransomware that is in there and works its way into your backups. So you want to make sure you have backups, and you have backups that are hopefully current, and also you have ones from previous dates too, so if it does work its way into your backups, so at least you have some point to recover from. And then another one is education. Education is huge. Not so much, obviously, your network folks are hopefully figuring out, configure your networks right and make sure your backups are done. But your staff from these make sure that they know the threats. Don't go to websites that you're unsure of. Don't click on links or open files. It's tough. I mean, even in someone in accounts payable, they get invoices all the time from everywhere. Sometimes they recognize it, sometimes they don't recognize it. They can't always know if they recognize these files and stuff. That's a great kind of way in for people to do that. But the more education they have, know what to look for constantly, because one of your biggest weaknesses is the employee that you hired yesterday. And also, good practice, actually, requirement from a tip and security standpoint to do regular security awareness reminders and alerts. You should have posters, and they should be getting regular, don't share your passwords, make sure your passwords are good, and don't click on links, etc. So these are some kind of key ways to protect, again, help protect. If you do these things, it could hopefully reduce the chance that you get ransomware, or reduce the odds of it spreading, or your ability to recover. So prepare. So backups, again, are critical. There's two components of backups: recovery time and recovery point, right? So know how long it takes to recover a backup. So backup is needed at noon, but it's going to take 2 days to recover, or 2 hours, or 2 minutes. How long it takes to get the information back. And then recovery points are key too, because once that information comes back, at what point did that represent the information? So it could take a day to get your data back, but that data was representative of the day before. So you know that that the information is as current as last Tuesday. So how long it takes information to get back, and at what point the information represented. Because if the information comes back and it was from last Tuesday, there's business that happened between those 2 points. So you have to really understand these, especially how long it takes to get your information back, because that's going to be one of the critical things that you'll want to know how long your business is going to be down, or maybe factor into whether you're going to pay or not pay the ransom. The other thing, most organizations have some type of cyber insurance policy. They're all different. They all have different costs, cover different things, have different inclusions. Sometimes they have, if you're going to trigger it, you need to call us first. What does it cover? What does it cover? Does it cover ransomware? A lot of times, if you have one of these incidents, and your cyber insurance says you have to use our law firm, you have to use our forensics folks, and you start using somebody else, they won't cover it. So understand that. Bad time to try to figure that out is when you have this event going on and you're trying to get the policy out. Sometimes there's large deductibles to trigger that. Sometimes we've seen $75,000 to trigger these things, depending on the policy. But you want to understand that and know what to do, what it covers on the preparation side ahead of time. Know your local law enforcement. Know their phone numbers, who they are, get to know them. You want to get those folks involved as well. You don't want to be digging through the phone book and finding out their number in a situation. At this point, there's probably some healthcare legal counsel you'll need to get involved. It's good to know those folks, at least know folks that are wise in the ways of cyber events and healthcare. This isn't a expertise area for a lot of just general law firms and attorneys. Remember, when these things are going on, right, you may, depending on the size of your organization, you may have all types of people that are asking questions, right? How long have you been down? What happened? You may have customers that are standing in the waiting room finding out what's going on here. Some of your employees may talk to the press. There's something going on here. So the press might be after you too. And eventually you're going to have to talk to your shareholders, your management, et cetera. So good idea to have that stuff ready as well. It's tough to make that up on the fly. But when these things happen, it's crisis, and a lot of different people are going to be asking sometimes different messaging to these different groups. Another thing you don't want to have to figure out is how to pay a ransom. So you might want to research if that happens, but depending on your type of ransomware, that may be Bitcoins or some of the other cryptocurrencies. So know how, if they're asking for a certain one, how to pay, because especially if it's something that is time sensitive, you've made the business decisions to pay, or maybe it's something that says you don't pay in a certain time. You don't want the barrier between how to pay to get in your way. So some of these things, not usually is information stolen, but sometimes there may be some other types of investigations going on about what this happened, how this happened. Being in healthcare, there's certain policies and procedures and regulatory stuff you want to have just to run your business, but also ready in case those types of things come up. And it's a good idea when we're talking about these things is to practice, right? So we'll have a little slide about maybe one practice scenario, but come up with a practice scenario, have ransomware hit, X departments are down, what do we do? So that's the time to stare at each other and find out, who does what, who do we call, and practice that the same way you would a fire drill or active shooter or a disaster recovery plan. There are some tools available where you can try to identify the strain that you had. Usually by sending it the message that you received, it can kind of fingerprint the strain. That will give you some good information about what it's doing, how it's acting, and also if there's a known kind of compromised key that's out to the public that may work. So that's another thing that you want to kind of have ready or know ahead of one of these things. So respond. So this thing's happened. You want to implement your plan, contact law enforcement, communicate to stakeholders. From an after-party standpoint, if you did recover from backup, there may be some things that happened in your business between your last backup recovery point. We haven't talked about HIPAA yet, but this is a cyber event, and this is a security incident, and it's technically a HIPAA breach. We'll get into that. You want to make sure your data is good too. So this is kind of the after you prepare kind of the response. Obviously, hopefully you have a plan, and there's a plan specific to ransomware, because there's different types of plans you can put in place for different things, and one size doesn't fit all. Talk about that when we talk about here. You've done the drill through this. Do you shut down your systems? That may be something that you want to decide depending on how your systems are architected, what they have on them, how fast this thing could spread. Do you know what the strain is? Obviously, identify the strain. Do you want to revert to paper while these systems are shut down? Again, those are kind of decisions you make on your business. A lot of it's going to depend on how you can recover, et cetera. Should you pay the ransom? Ransom, we've seen different things about, different decisions. You shouldn't reward bad guys. It's a philosophical thing, maybe it's a moral thing. But it comes down to a business decision. So depending on the type of ransomware that you have, how long it takes the information to recover, and the odds out there, there's no scientific data to this, but the odds are generally about 75% that you might get your data back. So depending on the price and those odds and what it takes to do, is it worth a shot, right? So that's a business decision. You may want to, once you do all that analysis on how long it takes information back, what does it cost you an hour to be down? Those types of things. Is it worth making a $30,000 payment with the chance that you might get your information back? Is there other things that they could have done in there while they were in there? All these decisions you want to make, but one of the things is, do I pay the ransom or not? Some people say you should never pay the ransom, but again, this is, I think, comes down to a business decision. Do you contact your cyber insurance company? Again, if you know your policy, you'll know that, hey, they're your first call. Or if you call them, it costs you X. So if you can figure it out yourself, you might call them later. Law enforcement, usually that's a yes. Legal, you want to, get the most brains on this as possible. And then implement your ransomware plan. So again, hopefully you thought through all these things. You know who to call, you know who's doing what, your messaging, and then in some cases, the clients that our clients, the ones that have recovered from ransomware, have a fantastic backup scenario. Have it, shut things down, bring all the information back, a non-issue. But I know a lot of organizations have a ton of data, and backups may be tested or not, et cetera. So your organization. These are some of the decisions that you have to make. So here's a test scenario. Here's a good one. Simulate that maybe Sally and one of your administrative things got a message. She gets messages from a lot of different people. She opened it. All of a sudden, your help desk is getting hammered. Other departments say they can't access stuff, and then you get a ransom message. Okay, what do I do? So that's a good time to simulate that. Part of good security is have incident response plans, et cetera. And again, one plan doesn't fit all. So that's a good test scenario to try out. Ransomware and HIPAA, and then most folks on here are HIPAA, are covered by HIPAA. If you're a health plan, health provider, or business associate, you're covered by HIPAA. Depending on which bucket you're in here, you either have your own protected data or another covered entity's protected data to comply with HIPAA. So HIPAA has its own kind of nuances here. HIPAA breach definition is if something or someone had access to your data enough to, this is if you access data that's not allowed by HIPAA, that's technically a breach. Someone had access. There's enough access to encrypt it, so it had access. And again, if someone gets into your network, they could encrypt it, they could steal it, or whatever. So, so there's something, and here's obviously different ways in. You need to do something called a breach risk assessment. You should have some, if you're in HIPAA, have some breach policies and procedures. Either you're going to need to determine the breach, or if you're a business associate, your covered entity, at least determine this or report it to your covered entity, depending on the way your business associate agreement is structured. But here, all your security incidents happen. Is it a breach? Is it no breach? In many cases, ransomware today, if you're sure it's a certain strain, doesn't steal your data, just messes your data up. So it's not a breach, but these are things from a HIPAA standpoint. You need to document and analyze all security incidents. And these are one of the first things that regulators will want to see, that, hey, you had ransomware, but you did a risk assessment for that. So that's, talk about HIPAA and ransomware. So this is for breach, contractors, cyber insurance, attorney, et cetera. We kind of walked through here. If it is a breach, it's more than 500 folks you want to notify. Another thing with the breach is 60 days from discovery. So within the 60 days, you should have all your analysis done to see whether it's a breach or no breach. So there is a time clock running from when you discover this ransomware or any security event, any of the press releases. It's a whole other topic is breach response. So now we're going to talk about Erie Medical Center. Case study I was asked to talk about this. Big place, 600-bed hospital. It's a pretty big hospital, trauma center. It's not a kind of a sleepy hospital. That's kind of not much going on at night. So there's gunshot wounds and those types of things. It's based on some articles and news articles about this event. So they had a ransomware event. Kind of the highlights here is a $10 million event, 5 in the incident response and 5 in damages over time, et cetera. And recovery took over 30 days. So you can imagine a place like that without access to information. And so we're going to talk about the event here in some detail. So here's kind of a timeline. When all said and done, they had a system was initially compromised April 2nd. Once, we'll kind of tell you how they got in a second, but once they got in, started to encrypt files, and then finally on April 9th, these notes started appearing. Weren't quite sure how far it got, so they decided to shut all the systems down. And the plan to organize and wipe systems and recover from backup and revert to paper. So again, it had to be made quick. That's a decision that was made. So they started the decision process, wiping all the systems. I think there was over 6,000 of them. So you can imagine what it takes to wipe and recover. 19th on day 10, some of them are back online again. Hospitals running off of paper, so you probably was pretty easy before 2010, and everything got moved to electronic. Downside of electronic, you get used to it. So day 15 came up in read-only. They're obviously bringing the systems back in priority. Obviously, ER and ICU start to get some of these functions back in communication. Day 26, they can start updating the EHR, and then putting in some of that paper that was generated before the event and the last, whenever the backups, the recovery point of that. Day 29, physicians can communicate with some other things, and then electronic prescribing restored. So you can imagine a hospital that size with that type of, obviously it takes heroic efforts to make this work, and we'll talk about some of those efforts. Some of the high points, good things that happen here. But you can imagine if you work in a hospital or have been in a hospital, kind of the chaos that ensued there. Not a good event. So here's some bright spots that happened. The HIE that Erie County was associated with did have patient records, right? So they were able to come in, get laptops up and going, at least give access to health records for some of the folks that were in the hospital as well. which is critical to find out about their health records and stuff. So that was kind of a new use for HIE as far as using it from a disaster recovery mode. And really lucky, they increased their cyber insurance from $2 million to $10 million, which is nice because it's about a $10 million event. But even after that, I think they're spending between $200,000 and $400,000 a year or a month or something. I'll have to dig that up to make sure that this doesn't happen again in education, et cetera. So pretty expensive lesson, but there were some bright spots here. So here's some key points. The system compromise. So attackers identified that remote desktop was open. There was a weak password, which they were able to crack easily, and then plop the ransomware into the onto the machines and have it spread however it spread. The ransomware note happened. It was about 30 grand. So so depending on the business decision, is that a lot of money or not a lot of money? But the decision was made not to pay it for a variety of reasons, and wipe all the computers and restore from backup, which obviously took from there over a month till everything was back up and going. And the closest thing, I believe, is what I had for as far as all systems are down was a plan that was based on a power outage. So we're going to assume we can't get our systems. It's just like all the power being out, so we're going to revert to paper. And eventually, a couple hours, a day, most, I think the power will come back. Everything will be fine, and we'll move on from there. Now, that's a different scenario than ransomware, because ransomware scenario, if you have kind of backups involved too, that can take a long time. So this is again a lesson as far as having a different type of kind of recovery scenario for different types of outages. Know your backup times, et cetera, know what's involved, and then there'll be different plans based on your business for these different scenarios. Here's some information. We have cybersecurity ebooks. There's some great stuff on Office for Civil Rights for cyber guidance, Office for Civil Rights from a HIPAA standpoint. There's obviously our audit protocol, Wall of Shame, which is that's our affectionate name for it, but if you have had a breach, that's where your name will be, and talk about the details of the breach and incidents and fines that have happened after the fact. So there's some additional information, and that is it. So thanks for your time. I think we'll take some questions now, and that's how to get a hold of me. So let me see.
Thank you, John. We can go ahead and start with questions. I've got two on deck. The first question, how can breaches be detected sooner?
A couple different ways. There is some technology called SIEM, called a SIEM System Information Event Management, which will look at logs from your firewall and your servers and your domain controllers, et cetera. I mean, these informations are spewing out logs all the time. There's a ton of information. It's tough to determine if those things are worth looking at, or something happened on this device and this device, putting them together, there's an incident here. Plus it has all your a history of your logs too. That's the way to do it. There's some kind of network monitoring tools that can kind of tell you about that. But it does take a high level of sophistication and some tools to be able to detect that earlier. That's why that's 201 days. And while I bring up logs, I didn't mention that in detail, but having, if you don't manage your logs, they will start to overwrite themselves. So depending, it could be a week, a day, a month, they'll overwrite themselves. And the logs are critical as far as to find out what happened and when, and also from a HIPAA standpoint to prove that no data left. Okay, so log management, some of these tools I talked about are a great way to find out ahead of time and also to be able to do the forensics. Because if your logs overwrote themselves and something happens and there's no information there, the best forensics people in the world aren't going to be able to determine what happened and if any data left. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, John. We've got some more questions coming in. This next one has a little bit of an explanation before the question. So one of the key steps in conducting a risk analysis is for HIPAA to identify threats. Often people use a qualitative method versus a quantitative method, treating that as a given. The likelihood of getting hit with a ransomware attack, would you generally consider the chances of an attack very low, low, moderate, high, or very high? Thank you.
Okay, that was good. Well, I mean, the HIPAA risk analysis, I mean, there's all types of different tools for that, and you're looking at where information is, and if you address that and different levels of risk, taking a deeper dive and looking at it, I guess, even quantitatively, if you use a methodology such as NIST or security controls, you can kind of dig into these processes and good security controls that are in place, and kind of zero you into policies, procedures, technical items that will kind of show holes out there and things that you want to take a look at, either procedurally, process-wise, technically, et cetera. So that's a good way to use that risk assessment to determine where your holes are. But in general, I think a lot of healthcare, just because of phishing, et cetera, I think has at least a medium level of risk to get ransomware, just because of all those entry points that there are there. And again, it'll depend on the sophistication of your environment, the training for your users. There's some good tools out there as far as doing phishing tests, et cetera, to make sure you train your users. But in general, you know, usually it's just kind of one click away from a breach, or someone stealing your data, or doing something disruptive like ransomware.
Great. We've got time for one more question. Some websites claim to have service to unencrypt ransomware files. Any experience with these? And they're specifically looking for success rates.
Good. Yeah, sure. Some may do it. I wouldn't. You don't want to rely on that. I mean, push comes to shove, and as part of your plan, you can try that. Again, you know, detecting the strain, and if these sites, you know, are able to help you, they will. But it's not, hey, I will get this, and there's a high probability of getting my data back. Again, if it's a you know, one of the things to decide is, am I going to pay my ransomware and try it there? Am I going to try to not have to pay it, see whether I can encrypt it, or I paid it and my information didn't come back? So I think that there's, you know, it may be worth a try, but it's definitely no guarantee. But if it works, then that's great. So that's kind of where we stand on that.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you to all of our attendees for participating in today's webinar. And I'd also like to thank today's webinar sponsor, eFax. And for those of you joining us next week in Scottsdale, Arizona at the WEDI conference, you can find them in our exhibitor hall, where you'll be having lunch and all the yummy snacks and everything. If you'd like to stop by and thank them in person for sponsoring this wonderful webinar, we certainly appreciate all the great education that you provided today, John. And I'll be following up with all of our attendees with information on how they can download this webinar, the recorded webinar, and I'll also provide the link to download the slide deck. So thank you very much, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their Friday, and you have a great weekend.
Excellent. Thank you.